Good morning. Always wonderful when I get a namaskara back from the audience. Thank you for that. Yes. I can see people walking in. I request you to take your seats. We're all set to begin. And today, you've got to be ready for receiving so much more, because the panelists who are going to be here in session after session are giving you more new insights, and it's my pleasure to be threading them together as the host. My name is Vasanthi Hariprakash, and wonderful to be given this opportunity to anchor this final day of the Global Investor Meet. Now, ಆತ್ಮೀಯರೇ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿರುವಂತ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ, let me give you a gist of what has happened this far and what you can expect. The Global Investor Meet has seen 2 successful days so far. The theme, as you all are aware, is Build for the World, with a purpose to envision a new Karnataka for a young and new India, and to showcase Karnataka as the most attractive investment destination. The meet has been bringing to you over 80 inspiring talks, more than 30 insightful sessions, with 6 country partners, over 300 exhibitors, and multiple B2B networking opportunities, which we hope that you've taken full advantage of, because these are themes and sectors which are critical to India's and Karnataka's growth story. So we've had with us over 5,000 senior delegates from across sectors like manufacturing, infrastructure, IT, energy, education, tourism, along with B2B and B2G meetings with stakeholders. Over the past 2 days also, let me remind and give you the gist that we've had fascinating discussions on the role of technology, emerging opportunities in India, climate crises, and an insight on entrepreneurship. And these with eminent political leaders like Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, Shri Piyush Goyal, Shri Basavaraj Bommai, and business icons like Shri Sajjan Jindal, Shri Vikram Kirloskar, Shri Karan Gautam Adani, Shri Rishad Premji, Ms. Randy Zuckerberg, and Ms. Nisaba Godrej. Today, on this final day of this mega grand investor event, we have some more engaging sessions, and I'm going to tell you a little bit and a quick gist of that. At Auditorium 3 at 11 in the morning, you would have what promises to be a very productive session on the scope of opportunities for collaboration with Australia and how do you capitalize those. Later at the plenary hall, we have a thought-provoking session on success stories of resilient Karnataka. These will be followed by the closing ceremony of the mega event, the Global Investors Meet. Please make sure that you don't miss out on these. Let me also remind you, in case you've not already had the time to go take a look, one is very close by at the beautiful NGMA campus, which is the National Gallery of Modern Art. You will see a showcase of Karnataka's art, and half a kilometer further, in a place called Chitrakala Parishat, already called CKP to Bangaloreans, is a fabulous showcase. I had a quick trip there between my sessions yesterday. A showcase of Karnataka's rich crafts, textile history. You can actually have a touch and feel. I totally recommend that you should go and see it. Coming to today's program, India has been long considered to be a knowledge powerhouse, and there are immense possibilities for innovation in our country. But how can India lead the innovation revolution? That is what the debut starting session is going to be on. But I'm not telling you more about this gentleman who's going to be up here on stage. The imprint of what he has created is there even in Bangalore, across India. But to introduce him, let me invite onto the stage the Additional Chief Secretary, Finance for Government of Karnataka, Shri I.S.N. Prasad, to introduce our special speaker. May we have a round of applause for the spirit of this event and for everybody who's been working visibly and invisibly. Over to you, Mr. Prasad.
Thank you, Vasanthi. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to invite all of you for today's session. How can India lead the innovation revolution? You know, somebody at my age in India, we have seen in our lifetime, the amount of change we have seen, both in technology and business models, is simply amazing. And while we have seen innovation, the winds of innovation sweep across the globe, India too is not too far behind. And in the last 1 decade itself, India has seen a lot of changes in the innovation space. UPI is one of the things which comes to mind where we have done something which is uniquely Indian and which is really one of the most successful innovations in the digital payment space. Government of India and Government of Karnataka are promoting innovation in various ways. Government of India has its own programs for Startup India, Digital India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. Government of Karnataka too has its own programs. We have the Karnataka Innovation Authority Bill, perhaps one of the few states which has gone ahead with this in our endeavor to promote innovation. We have startup booster kits available. We have multiple incubation centers. We have startup challenges being held. So I do believe that the subject of today is, can India lead innovation? Yes, I do believe India can lead innovation, and I think our time has come. Next 2 decades, I believe that a lot of Indian startup companies and tech companies and non-tech companies will be leading innovation in multiple ways and very disruptive technologies as well as disruptive business models. Now, without much further ado, I would like to introduce today's important speakers. We are very privileged to have them. I first would like to introduce Mr. Zev Siegel. Mr. Zev Siegel, as many of you know, is the co-founder of Starbucks Coffee Company. He has been in the news today because he was having Indian coffee in one of the restaurants in Bangalore. Mr. Zev Siegel has now become one of the, Starbucks, as you know, is one of the most recognized brands of coffee in the world. Following his departure from Starbucks, Mr. Siegel became a serial entrepreneur, founding Quartermain Coffee Roasters in Washington, D.C., Peerless Pie in Seattle, and more recently, Buckle Up. He has also started his own consulting company that serves owners of small business enterprises and aspiring entrepreneurs with advice regarding funding new companies, growth needs, financial forecasting, planning, private equity offerings, and applying for bank loans. We are privileged to have Mr. Zev Siegel here for the last 2-3 days, and I understand that he has been interacting a lot with some of our startup entrepreneurs and giving them advice. I now welcome Mr. Zev Siegel onto the stage to please come. I also would like to have the privilege of introducing Mr. Prashant Prakash, who is, we are proud to say, is from Bangalore. Mr. Prashant Prakash joined Axel in 2008. He began investing in Indian technology startups as early as in 2004, well before they acquired global attention. He started his investing career as a co-founder of Erasmic, one of India's first early-stage funds. Prior to that, he founded 2 enterprises in the internet and multimedia publishing domains. As a key member of Axel's India team, Mr. Prashant focuses on consumer internet services, online marketplaces, SaaS. He has led investments in Agrostar, Bluestone, Book My Show, Clevertrap, Fab Hotels. I can go on and on and on. Holiday Me, Home Lane, Inframarket. So he's a serial investor. I'm really happy to welcome Mr. Prashant Prakash to this stage. Thank you. Now it's over to Prashant.
Good morning, everyone. So when I walked in with this morning with Zev was afraid that there's nobody in the hall. So I said, in India, everybody comes in at the right time, and we have a pretty good, almost full audience here. So Zev, good number of people to listen to us. So yeah, go ahead.
I want to say that when I look at the audience, I realize that the ministers are mostly not here, and now we have the hardcore business people.
Zev, welcome to Karnataka and Bangalore, the home of coffee, I would like to argue. So this is coming home kind of thing for you.
You know, it's when I was invited to be here, I did my research. All good entrepreneurs do research. And I was so happy to learn that this is a coffee center and that there are many coffee roasting companies and coffee bars, and that excellent coffee comes from here. That was a bonus for me.
So Zev, I think a lot of people have, of course, heard of Starbucks, but the origins of Starbucks and the early days is not something a lot of us are familiar with. And I was just doing my own research on your background and your early days as a teacher. So talk about entrepreneurs coming from different backgrounds, right? So somebody who was started out as a teacher, but what got you started as an entrepreneur in the early days?
The question is, what got me started as an entrepreneur? I went to college, and after college I became a teacher. In the public schools, my students were 13 and 14 years old. After 3 years, I was like most entrepreneurs, I was getting restless. I wanted a little bit more from life. And I had two friends, Jerry Baldwin and Gordon Bowker, who also were getting restless. And the three of us at that time were 26 years old. So we started talking about how we were going to change our life. And we decided that the way to change our life was to start a business. Now, this is not like the year 2022. This was 1970, more than 50 years ago. And there was no entrepreneurship ecosystem. You had to do it yourself. The idea, we had a list of ideas. Most of them were just terrible. But on that list was gourmet coffee roasting. Coffee was pretty terrible in Seattle. So, we looked at each idea and said, well, is this a good idea? Is it going to be profitable? Are we the right people for each idea? And we decided that after doing our research that the idea of becoming a coffee roaster was probably the best idea for us. But of course, we loved good coffee, but we didn't know nothing about the coffee business. So we did what you would do. What would you do? You would find an expert to coach you. And we found a wonderful man who became an uncle to us. And he helped us learn about the coffee industry. We loved him, he loved us. And he made it possible for us to move into the coffee industry really easily. So that's how the idea happened.
So then fast forward, fast forward.
Have some more.
Fast forward one decade, you actually became a barista, right? And that's when you actually got on board Howard Schultz.
Yep.
And
So,
from those days, right, till between when you started and when you got, what were some of the early lessons on how you built the brand and how the whole thing evolved from being a coffee roasting company to a barista?
So we're talking now about the first decade of Starbucks after the initial startup. Now, I just want to remind you that we're talking here about the 1970s. When we started Starbucks, nobody had a computer. Think about that. I mean, that's a long time ago. So during that 10 years, Starbucks grew to become sort of a powerhouse company, but only in Seattle. During that time, in about 1982, Starbucks was big enough to have a director of sales and marketing. And the company hired a man who was living in New York, and his name is Howard Schultz. Of course, today Howard Schultz is famous, but he wasn't famous in 1982. And he came to work for the company. He was fabulous, just a fabulous guy. And Howard Schultz, about 2 years later, became the founder's exit strategy. This is the kind of person that you want to have around you, somebody who is smart enough and aggressive enough to help you with the exit. I'm going to simplify the story because we don't have enough time, but eventually Mr. Schultz and some angel investors purchased Starbucks from the original founders, and everybody was happy. The three founders started doing other things, and Mr. Schultz started building the Starbucks coffee company that we know today. And the first thing he did was change the logo from brown to green. And the second thing he did was to change from selling coffee beans to selling beverages. This was the beginning of the modern Starbucks. This kind of exit strategy is something that you could never put in a business plan. You know, when you are marketing shares to angel investors, they always ask you, well, what's your exit strategy? And you say, somebody's going to acquire us someday. That's really what people say. And in our case, we had no idea that Mr. Schultz was going to be able to put together enough money to acquire our company. I'm really glad he did.
Just a little bit of a tough question here. Would you like to maybe have a partial exit then and not a complete exit?
The question is, why did we sell?
Right.
Yeah, okay. This is a question that has an unusual answer. So we know Starbucks today, all of us, 300 stores in India, 32,000 stores, just like the stores in India, around the world. It's an amazing company.
Would you like to have a partial exit?
So the question is, thank you. The question is, well, why didn't we keep some shares? And the answer is, my partners and I are early stage guys. I have never started a company that I didn't sell within 5 years. So you might say, oh, you idiot, Zev, you should have kept those shares. But I don't feel that way. I know who I am. I'm an early stage entrepreneur, like many of you, and I wouldn't pretend to be a corporate executive. I don't know how to do that. So that's the answer to the question, why did we sell?
Some lessons that you have seen in, maybe you were not there in Starbucks, but as Starbucks grew and built their brand, anything that you have then later taken on as key lessons for other brands that you then built?
The brand building at Starbucks really began with myself and my two partners, and then it accelerated during the Howard Schultz era. We had certain principles that developed the brand. No compromise on the quality of the coffee. We tried to be the best way we possibly could. Add value from the consumer's point of view in every way you can think of. Make it a place that you really want to go to. Be very careful about your brand, not from your point of view, but from your customer's point of view. How do you want the customers to perceive you? The founders wanted the customers to perceive our company as a source of good coffee, accurate information about coffee, and an interesting experience. It was fun to go to our store and talk coffee with our sales clerks, a lot of fun. During the Howard Schultz era, starting in the mid-1980s, these things just became stronger. The team that has been running the company for the last 40 years, it's been a changing team, very devoted to the customer experience. And of course, we all benefit from that. When you go into the Starbucks, any Starbucks store in India or in China, it's a great experience. Sometimes they know your name or your drink, and you can talk, and your friends are there, and it's a beautiful store. Well, these are all things that began very early with the founder.
The white spaces in brands and trends that could be opportunities for entrepreneurs in a country like India? And is it an evergreen thing to keep building new brands and new brands replace old brands? So what's some thought on this?
Well, the question is having to do with the building of new brands in India. Before I answer that question, I want to say there has never been a more professional job of brand building than the state of Karnataka. I mean, look at this event. This event is incredible. And it is just one of the many things that the state of Karnataka is doing to build itself up. For example, in the tourism sector, many of you may not know this, but the tourism ministry is always promoting and going to trade shows all over the world to promote your state. So you might think about that, about how did they do that? How did they make Karnataka look so fabulous? So going back to this business to consumer space, you know, building brands is really something I believe for entrepreneurs. You need professional help. You have good instincts, you know who your customers might be, but the brand building, you really need somebody who has a broader insight. So maybe you have a friend who will help you for free. Maybe you join an accelerator where some of the people who volunteer their time at the accelerator will help you. There are many ways to solve that problem, to get professional help without spending a fortune in money. And, you know, some of the factors in building a brand and establishing a market position are known to many of us here. You have to be consistent. You have to know who your intended audience is. You have to understand them. By the way, for startup entrepreneurs who are here, as I said yesterday, the best way to understand your audience is to do focus groups. Because if you think about it, if you're a startup entrepreneur, you think you know what your potential customers want, but you don't. You just have your own ideas about what you want, and you try to project that onto the potential customers. So I think you need to be very careful to understand what customers want. In the early days of Starbucks, we had a secret weapon, and that was the co-founder named Gordon Bowker. Gordon Bowker understands marketing and especially how to position a company so it will be perceived correctly by the people that we wanted to be our customers. So you need to think about that. One of the problems with early stage companies is that the people who run them are very product oriented. You just love your new software. You love the platform that you and your team built, but maybe you're not so good at thinking about marketing.
So just talking about trends, after Starbucks, what are the kind of companies you continue to invest in, and is it mostly been consumer companies? That's your sweet spot?
So the question is about what's hot right now?
Yes.
Okay. For those of you who are going to be raising a seed round or maybe even a pre-seed round of investment, or perhaps a little later a Series A, it becomes important really quick. What's hot? Prashant's organization does a lot of early stage investing, and he's very careful about that, because sometimes what's hot, for instance, the metaverse, artificial intelligence, investors love to hear those terms. Oh, you're doing something in the metaverse. Oh, you're doing something with artificial intelligence. They think that's really cool. But the truth is that there are lots of other kinds of companies, software as a service, SaaS, still a very strong field. Business to consumer platforms, really strong. But they're not hot. They're not the latest, greatest thing. So why is this a problem? Well, if you're a startup entrepreneur, it is a problem because when you talk to the investor and you're not doing something in the metaverse and you're not doing something with AI, the investor says, go away. I can't talk to you. So that's a big problem. Smart people like Prashant and many other very savvy and intelligent investors don't get trapped by what's hot.
Just as a space, direct-to-consumer platforms is hot. So, we are a brand deficit country, Zev, right? So we have not created many exciting brands. It's just that now that we have seen brands like Starbucks and some of these globally, we are seeing more exciting brands being built in this country. So it's really a very fertile and very exciting time for entrepreneurs who want to build brands.
I want to say, in response to what Prashant just said, there has never been a better time than now to be an entrepreneur. And the state of Karnataka is a pretty good place to be an entrepreneur. Why do I say this? We're in the post-COVID era now, right? Nobody's wearing a mask. So there's a lot of excitement. People can go out again. Investors are being active again. In addition, this is a little bit more technical and specific. There's greater access to investors for entrepreneurs. Why is that? Why is it so much easier to get to talk to investors? It's because of the media that are available for you to contact them, and also the use of Zoom. You can contact almost anybody in the world now using in-mail, and then you can set up a Zoom appointment with them. And it is amazing what an effect this has had. I'm not sure about Indian entrepreneurs, but in Mexico, for example, I go to Mexico pretty often. A lot of entrepreneurs are tired of the very conservative investors in Mexico. So they're starting to make appointments online with investors in the United States. They're jumping over the Mexican entrepreneurs and going international. This is only possible because of the new media that are available.
Talking of post-COVID era opportunities, what were the new trends that you saw and opportunities for consumer brands in the post-COVID era? Any interesting ideas that you've seen?
Everybody loves to talk about how terrible the pandemic was. Oh, it just killed businesses, right? We all had to stay home. The economy stopped. That's not 100% true, my friends. There were winners during COVID. In India, the companies that manufacture bicycles for export, Bicycles became very popular in many countries because it was something you could do outdoors. It was safe during COVID. In many countries, the pet industry, people with expensive dogs and cats, the pet industry just took off. In the United States, the big box pet stores like Petco increased their sales volume 25% in 2 years. 25%. So there have been some winners during this period. It's not all bad news. And as a result, now that COVID is over, those industries, also I want to include the remodeling industry and the construction industry, because everybody was stuck at home, so they improved their house. IKEA, the international direct-to-consumer company that sells all kinds of furniture, IKEA loved COVID. Why? Because we all went out and bought a desk so we could work at home. So there have been winners, and there are many companies right now who are very strong right now. They have a lot of cash. Now, there are, of course, the restaurant industry. Oh, that's terrible. They were really hurt. Many went out of business. And there are other types of companies that also were hurt. But remember, during COVID, not everybody died.
Zev, talking about multi-generational nature of companies, Starbucks is a 5-decade company, and there's also a very inorganic aspect to how companies get built through acquisitions, and a lot of us don't look at that as a strategy. But for Starbucks, that has been an interesting way in which I don't think a lot of people know that. So was that a strategy to build through acquisitions, or did it just happen organically?
Starbucks and Microsoft, which are both in Seattle, by the way, their headquarters. And also, I want to say that Starbucks and Microsoft now have CEOs that are Indian Americans. Yeah, it's impressive. Both of these companies, when we look at them from outside, we think, oh, they must be geniuses. They always seem to have the right products, the right people. They must be growing it all from inside, right? No. Microsoft, in particular, when they see an industry that they want to get into, like the online gaming, they just buy companies. It's just a common way of growth at Microsoft. So, is that good or bad? Well, if you own one of those companies that Microsoft wants to buy, it's pretty good news. You have an exit strategy. Not only will they In the case of Starbucks, Starbucks is one of those companies that looks like everything came from inside the company. It's not true. Starbucks has acquired dozens of companies. Tazo Tea, which is one of their house brands. Tazo Tea was an independent company in Portland, Oregon, a good one, and Starbucks eliminated its own tea, purchased Tazo, and made that the Starbucks tea brand, Tazo Tea. This is in North America, at least. When Starbucks was first doing its global growth across the United States and then to Japan and the United Kingdom, one of the aspects of their global growth was to acquire companies. For instance, in Japan, they did not acquire a company. They did a joint venture, and that's how they entered Japan, I think, in 1999. In the United Kingdom, it was different. In the United Kingdom, some people from Seattle, when they realized what Howard Schultz was doing, moved immediately to London and set up a company just like Starbucks, and they called it Seattle Coffee, which is very funny. They opened 50 locations. So Starbucks wanted to enter the London market a few years later, and they looked at it and said, yeah, I guess we could compete with them, but why don't we just buy them? So they purchased Seattle Coffee, changed all their locations to Starbucks Coffee, The people who had owned that company retired and had a great life. Now they've opened a pizza chain in Seattle. So these are examples of acquisitions. They've also acquired a music company, a data processing company, all kinds of organizations. But as consumers, we never see that. But acquisition is one of the great ways to grow. Many of the companies that Prashant's organization has funded have either been acquired by a bigger company or become a bigger company and acquired smaller companies. This is the way of the world. And it is not a bad thing for entrepreneurs. It's a good thing.
Sev, coming to the topic a little bit more of innovation. And so innovation was a very North America, Valley-centric activity 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago. But there's been a lot of dispersion of innovation to China and more recently Israel and more recently now India. Do you see this as a continuing trend, and will this be a more democratic distribution of innovation over time?
Yes, I do. Let's see, I give talks online about once every 60 days. And as a result of those talks, people contact me sometimes, and then I start, we'll have 3 meetings on Zoom where we talk about what their problems are. These people are startup entrepreneurs. So I have a feeling for what's going on, not only in my own country, but in many other countries. And I can definitely agree that innovation is very dispersed. Of course, India and North America and some places in Europe, like Berlin, big center of innovation. These locations are going to continue. I mean, they have a head start on everybody else. But you wouldn't believe what's happening in Mexico. I mean, the Mexican entrepreneurs are just amazing. And they don't have the environment that you have in Karnataka. They have to struggle a little bit more. So I would say that the dispersal is going to continue. One of the countries that I've been thinking about lately is Vietnam. Vietnam is a really interesting nation, very entrepreneurial. They've become a very big deal in coffee. They have a lot of coffee plantations now in the last 15 years. I'm wondering if we're going to start to see more about what's going on in Saigon in the future. I think Saigon might become like a new Berlin.
I think talking about the whole China and beyond China and the China plus one strategy, in, let's say, take an area like manufacturing, right? I know that you've done a startup in the manufacturing space. Do you see now the more, more of a trend to redistribute manufacturing to countries like China, Vietnam and Karnataka right here?
During COVID, we all know that there was a problem with the distribution of parts and finished products. Transportation kind of broke down, so the supply chain became a problem. The country that had more trouble than anyone with the supply chain is my country, the United States. It was horrible. I can give you an example. I'll pick on my daughter. My daughter needed a new refrigerator, so she went to the nice distributor of refrigerators in Seattle, and they said, this is the model you want, and she said, okay, and they said, when will it be delivered? And they said, in 4 months.
Yeah.
This is what was going on in the United States. Now, that's just my daughter. What about General Motors, which makes many car brands? They are having a horrible time, especially with microchips. So this distribution problem caused a national crisis in the United States. The federal government, for once, in the United States, stepped in and allocated billions of dollars to build 2 microchip plants in the middle of the United States. And they did that because they were big business, like General Motors, for example, were so upset that they were dependent on China, and that China was, during the pandemic, unable to fulfill many orders. The lockdowns in China were serious. So now you see this movement away from dependence on China. Since I've been here in Bangalore, I've been thinking that's probably a good thing for Bangalore, because one of the obvious choices if a company wants to be less dependent on China is to build a factory in Bangalore.
Right. What about your own experience with manufacturing and the startup that you have in manufacturing?
Well, we talked a few minutes ago about what's really sexy, hot, in business. The metaverse, for example. What's not sexy? Manufacturing. When you say manufacturing to an investor, you're going to put them to sleep. They just go, oh, don't make me talk about manufacturing. And why do they say that? Because manufacturing not only is not hot, it takes a lot of money. Manufacturing is expensive. You need inventory, you need a factory floor, you need technicians. By comparison, starting a software company takes much less money. One of the companies that I talk to about once a quarter is a manufacturing company. This is a really interesting story because it has some other ramifications, some other lessons. The company, I can name it, it's called Voga Coffee, V-O-G-A, Voga Coffee. But they are a manufacturing company. Voga Coffee is in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley world. It's a very small company, maybe 20 employees. And they are manufacturers of an innovative coffee machine. It costs about $8,000. The customers are coffee bars and restaurant chains. So it's a business-to-business manufacturing company. This is not something that investors get very excited about. They just raised $1 million. Now, how did they do that? They had gone through a pre-seed round, a seed round. Now the seed round 2 is $1 million. One investor took half of that round, $500,000. Why did he do that? There were several reasons that made Voga Coffee attractive to him, and we all should pay attention to this. Number one, the CEO has a law degree, and for 5 years he evaluated deals for an investor. He worked for a man like this man, and so he got an education in how to position a company to investors and all of the aspects of equity offerings. This makes him a special guy. He also is incredibly passionate about coffee. Another reason why this investor invested, and this is a really, I almost hate to tell you this story. This investor is in Silicon Valley. He has an office in one of the 4-floor office buildings where half the money in the world is. And on the ground floor of this building, there's a really good coffee bar. It's sort of like the coffee company here, Ground Up, if you've ever been there. It's like that. So this guy just loves going to this coffee bar. So when he was approached about investing in a company that is manufacturing coffee equipment, he was willing to listen even though it was manufacturing. So there are special ways that you can appear to be hot when you're really just in the manufacturing business.
Great, Zev. That's very encouraging. I think there is a lot of innovation even in manufacturing, right? Nothing stays constant there, and I think there's a big opportunity for India and Karnataka in the next decade to be leaders in manufacturing innovation. Maybe this is my last question. Why didn't you look at investing as a career?
Well, Prashant is asking me, why didn't I do what he did? He had a successful company, and then he became a seed investor. Very unusual for a VC level investor to specialize in seed rounds. So why didn't I do that? Again, I want to say that everyone in this room, including me, is good at something. And there is something that was a theory that was popular some years ago called the Peter Principle. And the Peter Principle says that everybody who's good will keep getting promoted until they fail. You know, you're good at this, okay, we're going to move you up and you'll be good at that. And okay, you're good again, so we'll move you up and eventually you'll fail, right? Because you really aren't that good at doing that new job. I've always been very afraid of the Peter Principle. There's some things that I'm really good at, very early stage companies. That's my number one. And I felt that establishing a fund to invest would be outside of my expertise. And I also very much, as some of you already know, I really sympathize and put myself in the shoes of early stage entrepreneurs. I love working with them. I love helping them avoid the mistakes that other people have made. So I have always, as my wife says, Zev, you never grew up. I've always been at the new venture level.
Zev, this is really the last question. A personal habit, a good personal habit that you wish you had developed earlier. A good personal habit that you wish you had developed much earlier in life.
Oh, a good personal habit. I'm sorry, I just couldn't quite hear it. Well, as some of you have discovered, I'm a very open guy. I like to talk, I like to listen to people. So, you know, when people come up to me and they want me to say something, I always turn it around and get them to talk. What are you doing? Tell me about your company, that kind of thing. And I would say that that is a really good personal habit for business people, to learn to listen. You know, I can tell you from my personal experience, because I talk to, in a normal day, I talk to 2 or 3 early stage companies somewhere in the world using Zoom. And I would say about 70% of the time I'm listening, not talking. Tell me about this, tell me about that. And they tell me, you can't believe what an expert I've become by listening. I really have acquired quite a bit of knowledge. And I think that that's a good personal habit for all of us. If you're in talking with someone who might be helpful to you and you are doing the talking, that's a mistake. You should be listening. Let them do the talking, because you might learn something.
Thank you, sir. This was really good fun. And thanks for being in Bangalore and Karnataka. And look forward to having you here again in our state. Thank you.
You're welcome. Karnataka looks like the future to me. Thank you.
I'd request our guests to please stay seated for a moment, because we listened to you, Zev, and it's only apt that I invite someone who's going to be presenting a token of gratitude to you. So I just feel that having been a history teacher to creating a company which made business history, that's a big life. But to reach out and to give essential advice, as Prashant also mentioned, that's a magnificent life. Please, let's hear it for Zev Siegel. Thank you for being in the coffee country. May I invite Shri ISN Prasad to present our speakers with a token of gratitude as mark of appreciation. For someone who considers himself a startup guy, this is the startup city, an early stage entrepreneur, as Zev mentioned in his talk this morning. Many takeaways I'm sure you too had. Mattomme dhanyavadagalana sellista to our special guests who are here at the Global Investors Meet. Thank you once again, Prashant Prakash and Zev Sehgal for this, Mr. Prasad as well. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿರುವಂತ ಇನ್ನಷ್ಟು ಅತಿಥಿಗಳು ನಿಮಗೆ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. It's good to see the hall filling up. There are also parallel sessions that are happening in other auditorium as well, and I did mention, so please make your choice. At the same time, right here, we are beginning to have yet another thought-provoking session, and that is China-focused. Now, the China Plus One policy of many countries is proving to be of significant advantage to India. In fact, on day one, I was listening in to one of the sessions by Augusto Carlos of the World Bank formerly, and he said the sentiment is ABC, which is anything but China. What are today's panelists going to say? The title of the session being India, Epicenter of Global Supply Chain Shift. I'm going to be inviting, before we invite the panelists, the Honorable Minister for Labour for Government of Karnataka, Shri Shivaram Hebbar, for his address, after which I shall step back to invite all the other panelists.
Global Investment Meet Invest at Karnataka 2022. My greeting to Mr. William Balia, Mr. Hans, Paul Borkner, Mr. Jitendra Chandan, Mr. Nitin Pai, and all the delegates gathered today. Thanks for taking out of the time and gracing us with your estimated presence. In the backdrop of the current shifting global political scenario, the world is looking at India, and India has potential to the next global manufacturing hub. We Karnataka are already contributed to this vision of making India the next global manufacturing hub. Karnataka, as you are all are well wishers, India leading investment destination with multiple accolades on itself. First in attracting investment since 2006. First in renewable energy, 63% of our installed capacity lies in the renewable energy. First in electric vehicles, innovation, home to 7 auto OEM and 50% auto competitor manufacturing and 45 electric vehicle stops. First in bioproduction expert. First in electrician, design and R&D in India. With our ESDM policy, we are providing highest incentive in India. First in R&D determined. First in Indian Innovation Index. Bangalore is world faster growing technology and innovation cluster. Karnataka has been ranked a top attractive in the easy doing business, ranking by Department of Promotion and Industry International Trader Karnataka has been agreed as best professional in the state stamp ranking 2021 by DPITE. Karnataka continues to remain first attending FDI from the April 21, March 22, with a 1,076 CR, 38% share of a total FDI in India. This has been despite of the challenging promise solution. They ensure that the continued monitoring of leadership position and sustainable growth. The government of Karnataka has taken several measures to enhance investor friendly in the state. We have also taken up the first of its kind innovating in the country under products, especially industries cluster program. This including FMCG cluster in Dharwad, toys cluster in Koppal, bulk dog park in Yadgiri, EV cluster in Ramanagara, and so on. We also released updated policies of engineering, R&D, electric vehicles, data center policy, and aerospace and defense policy. With this compensative policy, reforms of the continue the imagine that we are a policy-driving state, and hence deliveries will continue in our promises in investors. I look forward of the discussion today and hope that of all of you present have make the best of the sum. Jai Hind, Jai Karnataka.
Very reassuring to hear those words, Mr. Minister. It's always good to know about the steps that the government is taking. Sachivaru Shri Shivaram Hebbar avarige dhanyavadagalu. And I'm here to invite all the panelists for this session, which is about the India advantage, the epicenter of global supply chain shift, for which I now invite the Vice President and Chief Executive for India at Lockheed Martin, Mr. William Blair, onto the stage. May we have a round of applause to welcome all our panelists and the moderator, the Chairman of BCG Global, Mr. Hans-Paul Bunkner, the Vice President and Country Head India at Global Foundries, Sri Jitendra Chadha, and also the session moderator, the co-founder of Takshashila Institution, Sri Nitin Pai. It's over to you, Nitin.
Good morning, everyone. I think we are in a very interesting part of today's discussion because it might mean a lot to Bangalore in the next 10 to 20 years. Before I start, I would just want you to think. Imagine there is another outer ring road outside the current ring road. And just like how the current ring road, outer ring road has industries, businesses that support the global IT industry, we have the outer ring road, the next outer ring road doing semiconductor design for the world, other kinds of high technology industries where Bangalore is actually servicing the rest of the world. It might mean horrible things for our traffic, but I think it means fantastic things for our economic growth, prosperity, and especially for the young people sitting out here, great jobs and great livelihoods. Now, such a future is actually possible given the situation today. Now, today we are going to talk about supply chains. I just want you to hold that vision in mind when you have this conversation. What does it mean for Bangalore, right? So, I have three great panelists here, and we're going to talk about how this vision of shifting of the world's industrial base, the world's industrial supply chains in various dimensions can happen, and how Karnataka and Bangalore can take advantage of it. Now, unlike what we've put on the theme of the event, saying that India is the epicenter of this supply chain movement, I think India has that opportunity. And the opportunity is not the same as having actually grabbed that opportunity. So there's a long way for us to go to grab that opportunity, and the dignitaries, the officials, and the people here, I think the common message for us to take back after this session is how do we make this opportunity a reality such that it changes our lives and prosperity for the state and for the country. So let me start with Hans Paul, who as a top executive at BCG was responsible for making the globalization of the last 30 years happen and such a powerful force for prosperity for the rest of the world, and also for its concentration in a few parts of the world. So can I just ask you to tell us the story of how we got here? How is it that supply chains got concentrated in a few places in the last 25 to 30 years? And then what is it that caused this movement towards de-risking and trying to move the supply chains from where they are now to a broader base?
Well, I would say, actually, we're not so concentrated, even though it looks like that everything is in China. But, you know, with the opening up of the economies beyond Europe, North America, and Japan, you know, the formerly communist countries open up the late 80s. India opened up in the early 90s. But also countries in Southeast Asia, you know, Vietnam, Indonesia joined the group of open economies. We've seen really enormous spread of economic activity across the world. And even, of course, the Middle East, you know, some countries in Africa and certainly Latin America have benefited, Mexico in particular. The key really is to be part of the world, really producing lots of products and services and contributing to that, and therefore also providing lots of opportunities for people as workers, as entrepreneurs around the world, but also making better, you know, providing better products and services, and also cheaper products and services for consumers around the world. So I think it has been enormous benefit for everybody around the world, making sure that hundreds of millions of people have moved out of poverty and really become a part of the, or member of the global world economy as an active member. And I think, of course, when you look at the situation in India, say, you know, why are we not at the center of this? I think in some parts, you know, India has really played a very important role. I mean, you mentioned IT services. The minister also mentioned IT services, where India has been a core place, but not yet in manufacturing because of the obstacles that people and investors, both domestic and foreign investors, have really met here in India. So whereas other countries like China, but also Vietnam and others, Mexico, have been very open to that kind of investment. And I think, you know, the question is not why are we not, because why have we not provided the opportunities?
Thanks. I want to go to Bill. Bill, you were with General Electric, you were saying you were with General Electric and now with Lockheed. And if I were to look at you as a representative of American business, why is it that the United States for the last 25 to 30 years did not recognize that massive amounts of high technology investments in China is going to be a geopolitical problem? Why is it that it took, you know, from 1979 to maybe 2016, why did it take that long for the United States to realize that concentrating supply chains is a challenge, it's a geopolitical challenge, it's not just a business challenge?
Well, you know, I think I'll just follow on my colleagues' prior comments. You know, I was going to say that it's more about, going forward, diversification, right? When we look at our workforce, we know we have a stronger and more resilient workforce when we diversify. And the same is true in our supply chains. We need strong, resilient supply chains through diversification. So although I'm from the U.S., I've spent most of my life since over the last 30 years working internationally. And I see the world differently from what you just described it. I see the world where U.S. companies, European companies, Asian companies are seeking to establish presence in places that maybe felt foreign to them. Look at how Japan automotive companies have moved into India. Look at our presence in India for over 40 years and establishing partners with companies like Tata. You know, Tata Lockheed Martin, Tata Sikorsky. We did that out of an opportunity because we saw centers of innovation and efficiency here in India, just as we did elsewhere in the world. But I think what has COVID taught us and what has the recent geopolitical scenario taught us, we need to work together with like-minded nations and establish those resilient relationships built on trust and performance. And I think Karnataka here in this state with Bangalore has proven that as a center of innovation for most of the most advanced companies that we work with in the US and Europe and the rest of Asia. And I think that's the future.
Thanks. JC, if I were to come to you, you know, nothing exemplifies concentration of an industry in few geographies as your industry, semiconductors. Like TSMC, South Korea and Japan, if you look at these three places, they probably constitute, you know, lion's share of the production of semiconductors around the world, if you include China. Now, can you share with us how did this happen? Why did the semiconductor industry concentrate in that part of the world? Although the technology came from the United States, from the beginning, the technology has always been from the United States and Europe. Why did manufacturing concentrate in that part of the world?
Yeah, you know, first of all, good morning, everyone, and you know, thanks for this opportunity. I will answer it in a little bit differently. What is actually now transpiring? It may have happened for maybe the cost reasons. It may have happened because you know everybody was trying to get the best product and through a concentrated effort and so on. But if you really look at it, there are few trends that are going on that I think right now we should pay attention to versus what may have transpired in the past. And few of them, I think they are very obvious, but I will just simplify it for all of us. One is, I think the demand for the electronics and the semiconductors continues to rise, and it is driven by, a lot of technology that is required for automation, for consumer electronics, for the new technologies that are pushing it, like the 5Gs and AIs and so on and so forth. I think that trend which started maybe 5-7 years back will continue. You can always say, yeah, there is a little bit of a slowdown that is happening, but that is cyclic. It happens in this industry all the time. So the trend of more and more semiconductor requirement and electronics requirement, I think would continue to happen for us to be a better society in the future. The number two, I think, is the geopolitical, pressures that are coming up, or what is happening from, different countries, the trade war, you can call it, or a little bit of a disruption that is happening with some of the war situation, which is disrupting our, overall supply chain. But what is happening there is people are starting to rebalance that as far as supply chain of semiconductor industry is concerned and the manufacturing in the semiconductor industry is concerned. So what you would look 10 years from now, I think you would have a different balance than you see today that has transpired over the last 10 years. Third thing, very important, this is a very complex, technologically advanced industry, the semiconductor world. And there is a lot of new technological advancements are coming in, which will define the future of how the manufacturing, how the connectivity, and what chemicals and the materials will be used in this industry in the future. So that advancement is happening. You might have heard of silicon photonics, the gallium nitride fabs, and so on and so forth. So those are the technological advancements that are happening. And the last one I would say, if you look at the overall semiconductor industry, there is a skill requirement that is lagging behind what is required in this industry. And the skills is not only in the manufacturing space, but also in the design space, the system engineering space, and also in the manufacturing space, the technicians that are required, the researchers that are required for semiconductor manufacturing. So if you really look at these 4 trends, I think what we should look at, if we are in Karnataka or India, we should look at what do we need to prepare for to meet the needs or to really comply with the trends that are happening in this industry.
Okay, I'll stop you there. We'll come to the to-dos in the next round. But I have a question for all 3 of you. You could take this in series, right? The last few years, we had 3 big shocks. The US-China tech war, the trade war, COVID-19, and now the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, all 3 shocks point towards the same thing as far as supply chains are concerned. Right, you need to diversify. Bill, as you said, you need to diversify. Can I ask each of you to share your thoughts on your learnings, impressions, insights from being through these 3 shocks? And what does it mean for supply chains in general or in your industry?
Well, yeah, I think indeed, as Bill has said, diversification is the name of the game. But it's not just because of the 3 last events that you mentioned. There was the volcano eruption on Iceland. There was Fukushima. There was the flooding in Bangkok. There was the blockage of the Suez Canal. And every time, of course, we had significant disruptions for one industry or the other in a massive way. And every time we did talk with our clients about hedging, really diversifying, risks and making sure that at least in each part of the world, Asia, Europe, North America, you have to have a factory, you have to have 2 or 3 suppliers. Strikes in the past also have been, a major disruption. And every time people went actually back and says, it's more efficient, to source from one place. I think this time it probably is for real because the damage, the potential damage and the potential tensions are so that people really take it seriously. And this time I think we will have, make these efforts to have not just global supply chains, but also regional, local supply chains, nearshoring. Not everything will go back to the US, but it could be Mexico. In Europe, it could be go to Central Europe, to North Africa. And in Asia, you have Southeast Asia and potentially India as alternatives to China. That's underway, and it will be really important, I think, because the shocks have been really deep.
So you want to take the floor?
Yeah, of course, the COVID was the biggest hit, right, that we saw in our personal lives, in our businesses and so on. But there was many other disruptions that, were pointed out here. First of all, I think none of us were prepared for what was coming. I think we all reacted. And so some of the learnings that you are asking, what I can speak from, my company perspective is, I think one of the learnings was, the things that were seen from Global Foundries perspective, we are into, we have a manufacturing footprint which is global. And this manufacturing, we do manufacturing solutions in US, Germany, Singapore, and very recently in France. So if you look at that footprint that we have, that actually became, positive for us, although it was a high-cost geo footprint, because that allowed us to continue with our, with less disruptions. Of course, there were disruptions as compared to people who had, most of their engagements in, one part of the world. Right? So for us, I think because of the diversity that we have in our manufacturing footprint, we had a very resilient and reliable supply chain that we were able to lead with some of the disruptions. And I think going forward, that will still be the same for us, so that we do not get bogged by one area or one region. So that is number one learnings, that even if it is a little bit costly, I think that helps as far as running the tide when you are in a tough situation. The second one, I would say the learnings from Global Foundries is we kept our strategy on innovation intact during these disruptions. There were a lot of new technological innovations that were brought in that our customers benefited benefited from. And that allowed the world to run while we were going through these disruptions. The second one, I would say the learning was we kept making the technology investments in this area because we knew these technology investments should not be stopped because of these disruptions. So in examples of those were investing in a new fab in Singapore, for example, making an investment in France during this tough times, to an extent that our company went IPO during the tough COVID environment. Just last year, in 2021, October, we went IPO, and two of the biggest IPOs of 2021, or the most important IPOs. So I think the learnings were, how you keep the investments in the technology space, the innovation keep going, and at the same time, take advantage of the global footprint that you have built.
I think I'll lead off. The COVID pandemic and what we learned through that. I was here in India through the entire time mostly, and we were and continue to produce the tail of the C-130J in Hyderabad through our joint venture with Tata, and we actually had many products, many of these deliveries going through Mumbai ports to get to the U.S. to get integrated into a complete aircraft. We had a lockdown for 3 months where we couldn't continue to produce, but we had requirements. You had some countries, such as in the U.S., that had defense and security as one of the carve-outs, like health and services, to allow people to continue to their production. And what I thought, what we did learn was we had to find new ways to engage governments, public-private partnerships. In the small example that I used, how could we continue to deliver our product to meet a requirement and an urgent need? We never missed one delivery, and we met our deliveries through the COVID timeframe. And that's because we could work with states and the central government to make that happen. Look at the vaccine production, or look at the PPE production. There were companies that weren't producing, but they produced it out of necessity to meet an urgent need, and they did that through collaboration. And I think that was so true. I think we created a level of resilience through that is helping us now going forward as we face other challenges in the supply chain. And the other thing we learned we had to do was we have tens of thousands of suppliers. We had to ensure that we sustained our supply chain in terms of placing orders, making payments. People had to keep their workforce in place without knowing how long the COVID pandemic would last. How long would we continue to work remotely? How are we going to adapt our workforce in a way that we can continue to meet, in our case, defense and aerospace urgent needs, but urgent needs across all sectors? And then how do we work remotely and actually with speed, simplicity, and self-confidence going forward to actually come out stronger and more efficient and more effective? And so I think we learned a lot in terms of how we can be more efficient. And we also learned, I think, what I mentioned earlier, the strength of diversification. Here in India, we have a Self-Reliant India initiative that grew out of the early days of the pandemic. And it's really about, for us as a company, working with local partners at the large, small MSMEs, and even incubating startups to meet India's needs, connect into our global supply chain so that as and when the Indian requirements come up in the defense domain, we're going to be able to deliver with local partners and bring our best capabilities from around the world, but integrate here to deliver a fighter aircraft or a helicopter. And so I think the last few years is accelerating that transformation out of necessity and shared need.
Thanks, Rich. Now let's move to another thing where I'm going to put you guys in a spot, right? Because I think if we accept, as we all do, that the shifting of the world supply chains in various dimensions is an opportunity for a country like India, and for Karnataka, what would be the strengths that you see in the Indian economy in Karnataka? And what would be your wish lists? What are the things we need to do to be able to gain that opportunity, right? That's one part of the question. The second part of the question is, to what extent do you think the drive towards self-reliance, Make in India, indigenous production is helpful in this whole business of enjoying the benefits of supply chain movements? I'll start with you.
Yeah. So I think in order to attract more business, both domestic and foreign investors to India, I think people, of course, look for talent. You know, not just engineers and scientists, but also, of course, electricians, skilled laborers. And I think there is a good flow in India, but a lot more can and should be done. So education needs to be better, vocational training can be better, and of course the number of students from science engineering has to further increase going forward. So but I think there is a good base there. What I think is a challenge is land in order to build factories. You know, some states are doing a good job, other states have a tougher time, and getting land is not easy. Having the infrastructure, physical and digital infrastructure, is a challenge, and a lot more needs to be done. And then I think we need better institutions, government services, agencies. I mean, everybody talks about one-stop shopping, but then you still have to deal with a multitude of agencies and institutions, you know, they can make life very difficult for you until you have the necessary permissions. And you know, in many states, lots of MOUs are being signed every year, and only a very small portion is actually being realized. And so I think it's very important to use the opportunities to make this work. The interest is certainly there. India, besides Southeast Asia, is, you know, the other big opportunity for having alternative production besides China. And I think, you know, the opportunities there just need to grasp it and really provide also the conditions to make it work. So as I said, people, physical infrastructure, institutions, rule of law, so that you can rely on what is being agreed on. Now, I would not, you know, going to your second part, I would not overly emphasize this self-reliance, you know. I mean, Europe, North America, Japan, none of us is, you know, self-reliant, and trying that would be massively uneconomically, you know. So we need to really work together across the world. But I think, you know, there are opportunities to really have a strong base here in India, not just for India, but for the rest of the world, and to export a lot of stuff. So I would you know, de-emphasize the point of self-reliance, and I would emphasize the point of really providing opportunities for the rest of the world, because we all have to remain open economies. The moment you close down, you know, you will certainly suffer, and I think growth will be really much slower. Look at Latin America. They have never moved much beyond import substitution, except for Mexico, and it has meant, you know, staying a commodity play, and having relatively low rates of growth.
Bill, can you come in next?
Sure. You know, I think one of the big strengths here is that here we're sitting in the center of innovation and the center of creativity of so many world-class companies, as well as world-class companies that have grown up here in India. We're in the fastest growing startup ecosystem, I feel. And you can feel the energy that comes with that. And there's a tremendous amount of innovation and creativity that's coming. I think that's a tremendous advantage. How you harness that and adapt it and bring it to market most effectively and most quickly, both to meet India's needs as well as the global needs, with I will say, for instance, an example, production-linked incentives has been a real accelerator, I would say, in a way, of public-private partnership to bring the investment that you've seen elsewhere in the world as a catalyst for companies that can actually grow and meet India's needs and actually grow our exports. I think that's a great example in cross sectors that we're seeing here today in India. When we think of self-reliant India, I think we also have to think about bringing the best capabilities and integrating here. And so in different sectors, it's defined differently. But I think what's important is, for us, at least in the defense domain, is to work with partners, integrate the best capabilities from around the world, developing those capabilities and partnering with companies here in India, delivering to meet India's requirements. But if it's a world-class solution to meet and pace the threats or the challenge, the demands that are needed, then it's also going to be a solution that we can export from India as well. And so I think that with the government incentives, both at the center and state level, the level of innovation and human capital, and I'll say creativity, we call it Jugad here in India, right? It's what we say elsewhere is make it happen. And I think people have a personal drive and interest and capability to make things happen. And I think that's our future.
Yeah, so I'll try to be short, but the strengths, some of them are already talked. I think the strength we see in Karnataka, one of the ones I would like to mention is the collaboration that we can have with the government and the industry-government collaboration and the approachability we can have with the government, even advising them on some of the policy decisions that are most important for the industry. I think that is definitely one of the strengths, and we should continue on that. The second one, from our industry, semiconductor industry, the design and is the skill availability in the state, and some of the research institutions or technology institutions that are available in the state, I think are of very high value add. The third one, I would say, from Global Foundries perspective, we have a lot of our partners and the people we work at the global level have a presence in the local ecosystem. And that allows us to work closely with them and really develop solutions that our customers require. And the last one, I would say, the overall fabless ecosystem that is developing very fast, the startup ecosystem here, we would definitely want the process technology of Global Foundries to be exposed to them so that they can really nurture their businesses in the future. So those are some of the strengths. I think on the self-reliance one, I would say we should look at, yes, self-reliance is okay. We should try to, take some enthusiasm built around it. But I think the lens we should look at it is from semiconductor perspective, what is the contribution of India in the overall semiconductor ecosystem? Are we increasing that contribution so that we have a play on the table when we are discussing, and we are not being hosed when there is a requirement that we need and we cannot, get the semiconductors from outside. So we should not be in a place where the national security is in danger. So our contribution in the semiconductor ecosystem, how do we increase that? I think should be one of our priorities rather than total self-reliance.
Can I just add one thing? I mean, what I think makes us all very optimistic, and why we at BCG are also very optimistic about India is the people. That is the biggest asset, as entrepreneurs, as scientists, as engineers, as workers. There is an enormous talent here, and it's just not Indians, not just here in India, but all over the world. And I think if this potential is unleashed, if India is open enough, if we can really make it work, and India will become a major center for production, but also for providing services as it already is in IT around the world. And I think, unleashing that potential is, I think, the most important thing, because the capabilities, the talent is here.
I think there's no better way to end this panel than on those words. We shouldn't try and improve on perfect or near perfect comments. So I'd like to end this session here, catch up on time, and wish the panel, thank the panel for being so generous with their time and being candid with their remarks. And thank you all for listening. So let's make it happen.
Would request you all to please stay back for a moment. Thank you, Nitin, for tackling the China part for us, and of course the global supply chains after, especially the three shocks that you mentioned during your panel discussion. May I please invite Mrs. Gunjan Krishna to please step up on stage to offer tokens of gratitude to all our guests, the panelists. India, epicenter of global supply chain shift. That was what you heard, or if you just walked in, you missed, I would say. We had Nitin Pai, co-founder, Takshashila Institution, moderating it, as well as Mr. William Blair, Mr. Hans-Paul Bunkner, and Shri Jitendra Chadda as panelists on this talk session. Thank you once again. May we hear it for all our panelists as well as the moderator of this session. Also, to just remind our audience of the two other options outside this venue itself, you can make your way to the National Gallery of Modern Art, NGMA, which is right next to Mount Carmel College, to catch the best of Karnataka's art, as well as textiles and crafts, beautiful saris and other creations that people, weavers make handloom. That is at Chitrakala Parishad. Those two are open and you can make your way. There are also free buses from this venue on to that, so please watch out for that as well. ಆತ್ಮೀಯರೇ, ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ನಿಮಗೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನ ಕೋರ್ತಾ, next session, let me tell you about that, which is to do with healthcare transformation. So that's going to begin in just a couple of minutes. We have our guests, our panelists who will be joining us. The mention of the word COVID-19 or pandemic or lockdown is just so frequent in our conversations, isn't it? But how do we take the lessons of this pandemic? How do we move on from this point? So the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly opened a window of opportunity for rethinking. How do countries prepare for public health crises? And to discuss this and how we can take the next steps, I would like to invite, first of all, the Honorable Minister for Health and Family Welfare and Medical Education for the Government of Karnataka, Mr. Dr. Sudhakar, onto the stage. We also have our other panelists who will join us in a little while. I'm going to make the names, announce these names. The Chairman and Founder, Narayana Health, Dr. Devi Shetty is going to be with us. Commissioner, Health and Family Welfare Department for Government of Karnataka, Sri Randeep. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist, WHO. She will be joining us virtually for this talk and session. And the session will be moderated by the founder of The Print, Sri Shekhar Gupta, in just a couple of minutes. I request all the guests to please take your seats. We are about to start the session. I'd like to remind our audience that the session presently is on transformation of healthcare. That's the segment we are looking at. I'd like to invite now the Honorable Minister for Health and Family Welfare and Medical Education with the Government of Karnataka, Dr. Sudhakar, onto the stage. Sachivarige Swagatavanna Korona. I request everyone to energize this auditorium with a round of applause. There have been very thought-provoking sessions in the beginning. We also have the chairman and founder, Narayana Health, Dr. Devi Shetty, with us joining the panel. Namaskara, Swagata, Dr. Sudhakar. Also the Health and Family Welfare. We are going to be having one chief panelist joining us virtually, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist, World Health Organization. And the session will be moderated by the founder of the print, Sri Shekhar Gupta. It's over to you, Shekhar.
Welcome to this session. In West Karnataka, healthcare, in conventional wisdom goes that healthcare and investments, business, entrepreneurship, etc. don't go all together. But they always did, and they always will, and they do. And what the pandemic has taught us is that it's not a question of whether you need capacities, healthcare capacities, in the public sector, government sector, or the private sector. It tells you that when a real crisis comes, then you need facilities everywhere on mass scale in any case. But even in normal times, all universes have to intersect, they have to complement each other, and there will be various choices for various categories, economic categories, social categories, and various disease categories. The other thing that the pandemic has done is that I know that many of you in this audience, and Dr. Shetty for sure, have experience of medical education. The minister handles and leads medical education in a state known for its educational facilities. That public health in particular has always been seen to be not the top priority for medical graduates. That is, if you don't get in anywhere else, because you make money maybe in cardiac surgery, maybe neurosurgery, maybe in so many areas, but not really in public health. But again, this pandemic reminded us that this is public health, mental health, two most important areas of medicine. So there was a world that we lived in before the pandemic. There is a world that we are living in now, and that is the world after the pandemic. So to discuss how we go ahead and how we implement these lessons learned during the pandemic, we have these three marvelous panelists who I will not now waste time introducing. You know them all very well, also because we are running a little bit behind schedule. So without much ado, if I may ask Dr. Soumya Swaminathan to make maybe a few opening remarks, and once that is done, then we'll have the others, and then we'll follow this pattern: opening remarks by her, by the minister, by Dr. Devi Shetty, just go left to right, and then we'll open it up for discussion amongst themselves. And then, do we have time to take questions from the audience? Yeah, okay, all right. So, Dr. Swaminathan, please, and we apologize to you that we are a little bit late. Usually, I'm the usual suspect, so I am the default guilty party. Even if I'm not the guilty party, I'm happy to take the blame.
Ma'am, sit back. Sit back a bit. Great, ma'am. Thank you.
Shekhar, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am able to hear you. Hi. Just to see you, we have to turn around, but I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, I had just a couple of minutes loss of connection, so I missed what you said at the beginning. I was connected in.
I will tell you what I said. Besides the usual introduction that where you didn't miss very much, I said that we are starting this session late. Now, I'll not go into who's to blame because I'm the usual suspect. So even if I'm not to blame today, by default, I will take the blame. So I apologize and let's go ahead from here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So please go ahead. I said that we'll start with opening remarks from you, and then the two other panelists, and then I'll ask you all questions, and then we'll take it to the audience. So why don't you start with some opening remarks?
Okay. So thank you very much, Shekhar, and it's indeed a pleasure to be on this panel with the Minister Sudhakar and with Dr. Devi Shetty on a really important topic where I think the overall theme of the conference is about investment. And I think that's the word that I would like for us to think about in terms of health. So anything that we put into health, I think we should think of as an investment and not as an expenditure. So that's really the first message, because we've seen that without health, everything else really doesn't exist and doesn't happen, and the whole world was in chaos thanks to a tiny virus which caused this pandemic. And it also exposed a number of problems, as well as I think brought a lot of opportunities for us to harness. So a couple of lessons that I took away from the pandemic is that the first thing is that science and technology today has advanced so much and is continuing to advance at such a rapid pace that it will provide for us a lot of solutions, whether it's going to be in the form of new vaccines, whether it's going to be digital tools, or whether it's going to be new vector control methods whereby we can control mosquitoes. These are all possibilities, and with the advances in genomics and proteomics and gene editing, I think that it is going to be really hard for us to keep up, really. And we have lots of opportunities. But again, that means investing in research, investing in science, investing in building a workforce that's scientifically literate and technologically competent. And Karnataka, I think, is in a very good position, and so are many other states in India. I think the second lesson that I took from the pandemic is that it exposed the inequities and the vulnerabilities in our system. There was no healthcare system in the world, or very few, I would say, that were able to cope up with this kind of a health shock. And that speaks to resilience. And that means that we must always think about having extra spare capacity, particularly in terms of the workforce and particularly in terms of essential commodities like oxygen. And I think this was a lesson learned by many countries. And even though something as basic as oxygen that saves lives from pneumonia and wasn't just essential for COVID, it was COVID exposed that the gaps in oxygen access actually resulted in a preventable loss of lives. And so for investing in the access to supplies, vaccines, medicines, essential commodities, and not to forget diagnostics at the primary healthcare level as well as at other levels is going to be very important. And third lesson is that the underlying health status of the population, as well as the inequities within societies, between countries and within countries, accounted for most of the excess mortality that we saw. So for instance, even in countries that have a relatively young population, people with underlying illnesses, chronic diseases like diabetes or hypertension or obesity were the ones who suffered. And normally one would think, one is an infectious disease, the other is a non-communicable or a chronic disease, but you can see the links between the two, and therefore focusing on prevention and health promotion as part of our primary healthcare services will not only deliver dividends in terms of improved health, but also reduce the costs that will be incurred in tertiary care. And finally, I just want to give a statistic that we need to think about. While our life expectancy has increased tremendously from the time of independence, I think today our life expectancy is an average of 71 years, the global average of 73 years. We've done very well. But in terms of healthy life expectancy, India's average is about 60 years, which means the last 10 to 12 years of our lives are spent with ill health. And this is again pointing to the fact that we need not only to invest in curative aspects, but in prevention and health promotion. I'll stop there for now, Shekhar.
Well, thank you very much. I'll go to the minister now. We all talk about lessons learned during the pandemic, what the pandemic taught us and how we learned on the move. But what lessons remain? Usually in the governments, everywhere, but particularly in governments, the belief is that once the crisis is over, it's business as usual. So what lessons endure, which we now carry forward, which you carry forward, and which you are now putting into effect?
Thank you, Shekhar-ji. First of all, when I assumed the ministership, that was the first time I became a minister. Within a month, we had to face what is called as world's largest pandemic. The COVID has taught us many lessons actually. We are the generation where we witnessed the pre-COVID times, COVID times and post-COVID times. But during COVID, what we had to learn and what we really try to do our best is whatever the action, whatever the reaction that was supposed to taken by the government, that was the speed and the size. In the speed in which we had to act, because of our population, we had to increase our infrastructure multifold, augment our infrastructure, and also getting the health staff is not very easy. To augment the health staff is not easy. You can get the equipments, you can build the facilities. We did it, but apart from that, we increased close to about 15,000 healthcare professionals in Karnataka, in addition to the people who are already in the systems of healthcare and medical education. Secondly, COVID also taught us how important use of technology is, especially the artificial intelligence, telemedicine, tele-ICU. These were the first that we started here, because we want to ensure that the healthcare or the health treatment, the tertiary treatment while taking the COVID, should, even a Bidar, a person who is getting treated in Bidar should get the same kind of treatment that the patient was getting in Manipal Hospital or our Narayana, state-of-the-art hospitals in Bangalore. That is why we set up a centrally monitored tele-ICU with 3 shifts, roping in all the best intensivists from the private sector and the government sector. We used to monitor this to minimize the deaths. Post-COVID, as you know, we have started increasing our medical colleges. 5 districts is getting new medical colleges now. By 2023, we are inaugurating all these 5 medical colleges. And apart from that, we are augmenting in terms of facilities. We are building a lot of trauma centers. Intensive care has been initiated. More than anything, the lessons that we should have learned from COVID and we should learn probably is the future of healthcare should be like this. It should be personalized, it should be preventive, it should be predictive and preventive. We are not speaking about the P, which is the pill. That is the new way of dealing with the healthcare, especially when you are dealing with the public healthcare system.
Are you looking at expanding capacities in some specific areas?
Absolutely. The challenge or the healthcare deficiencies, as we all know that, there used to be a disparity between A and B cities, rural areas and urban components. Even today, though we have met the required doctors population ratio as WHO's recommendation, in fact, Karnataka has bettered it. We have one doctor for every 800 odd people in Karnataka. But
these are real doctors.
These are real doctors, because I am including even Ayush doctors as well, along with the allopathic doctors. If you are considering only allopathic doctors, then we have one doctor for every 950 population. So the disparity is that even today, even after having so many doctors, whether we have a doctor in the remote areas, no. This is the disparity. Whether a remote area, a person, a villager is getting access to the global standards of healthcare, no. These are the challenges that we have to really face, and that is why our Honorable Chief Minister Bommai for the first time during his budget this year, he has called what is termed as aspirational districts. So we are investing more in aspirational districts and aspirational taluks, where there is not enough healthcare facilities, right from primary to tertiary. We are trying to augment the systems there in the very required, demanding areas.
Dr. Shetty, besides your thoughts, let me also pose two more questions that come from what our two earlier speakers have said. One, this was a virus that told us that there were some things that hit you which didn't care what your economic status was. So whether you were rich or poor, whether you went to the most expensive hospital or just found a neighborhood doctor with 2 beds and oxygen and steroid, you got pretty much the same health care. So what lessons do you take forward from this going ahead? Because you are somebody who's worked in both areas, who's worked in the pure corporate area as well as the pure sort of philanthropic mass area, not exactly philanthropic, but mass area, affordable, very affordable. So what does the pandemic teach us that changes or that modifies our plans and thinking going ahead? And second, after what the minister said, it's one thing to have a doctor per 800 people, but how good are these doctors? What all can these doctors do? How much can a doctor do without some facilities and some care like nursing, path labs, things like that?
Thank you, Shekhar. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
I think we can take this one.
Thanks, Shekhar. Thank you so much. I would, first of all, I would like to thank our Honorable Health Minister for the way he has led the state by getting both private and the public sector together to fight this most difficult period of our life. It wasn't easy, and he has, with his dynamic leadership, he has played a role.
Are we audible to all of you? Yeah, carry on, sir.
Yeah. The second thing about we discuss, when you are speaking, it wasn't audible. I guess why you are indirectly asking me why the Indian mortality of COVID was less compared to the what was projected by various international agencies. Am I right, Shekhar? Is that the question you asked me?
But I'm not able to hear you.
Yeah, there is a problem.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So essentially how India has done well in...
So I will explain to you, Dr. Shetty and I were having a little conversation here about COVID deaths. And he has a view on why India's average COVID deaths might have been lower than in Western countries. So he's explaining why.
See, the lot of international reports mention exaggerating the COVID death in India, saying that Indian government has undermined the numbers. But my impression, along with all the senior doctors, is that India has done extremely well in controlling the number of deaths, mainly because of the nature of the disease. COVID disease as such, whether in England or in Europe or in India, required only two types of treatment. That is, when diagnosis, you don't need fancy labs, because during the COVID crisis, if somebody has high fever with difficulty in breathing, it is understood without chest X-ray also it is COVID. Now, what is the treatment in England? The treatment in England is oxygen and steroids. And that's all made all the difference in all these expensive injections you gave. We don't know whether it really made an impact. Now, this is available in each and every nook and corner of our country. You drive on any highway, every few kilometers you find a hospital where they have oxygen, where they have steroids. So most of the COVID patients didn't treat in our hospitals in Bangalore. They were treated in 30-bed, 10-bed, 5-bed nursing homes. That is the reason why we brought down the mortality. And in Western country, they didn't have the privilege because of the zoning system where number of beds are restricted. Whereas a 30-bed nursing home can easily add another 20 beds by borrowing some beds from the neighbor, and he could give oxygen and the steroid. This is what it is. Now, Shekhar, I do not wish to talk about the past. Now, there is an impending crisis waiting to hit this country. That is the shortage of nurses. All over the world, there is shortage of nurses before COVID. After COVID, nearly 10 to 20% of the active nurses in US and Europe, all the developed countries, retired. They don't want to be nurses anymore because the stress of job is so much. They decided not to be nurses. Now, these countries cannot go on because in US, nurses' salary has gone up 3-4 times. It is unsustainable. So first thing they will do is to look at country like India, and all we need is 10% of our active nurses to leave our hospital. And all these nurses will emigrate, are not the nurses working in the government hospital. Government hospital nurses will never leave. It is a private sector hospital where 60 to 70% of the patients are treated. And that will have a massive impact because as a senior doctor, I can tell you, in a hospital who takes care of the patient is not doctors, it is the nurses. Now, do we have an option? We have a phenomenal option which we can implement right away. Since the Honorable Health Minister is here, let me tell you how we can address. All we have to do is to ask all the hospitals with over 100 beds to start a nursing college with the intake of 50 or 100 students based on the number of beds. A 500-bed hospital may take 100 nurses. And the entire training program of nurses should change from the classroom training to the bedside training. Today, nursing training is exactly like you want to train somebody to swim, you have to put him in the swimming pool. You cannot train people to swim in a library or in a classroom. And that has to change. The second thing, I'll give you one simple comparison, Shekhar. At the age of 18, some boys and girls want to become nurses, they join nursing college. At the age of 18, some boys and girls want to become pilots. They join pilot training institution. At the end of 10 months, a pilot training program recruited boy or a girl will get the license to fly a plane with passengers in it. But a nurse who spent 4 years in the nursing college, when she graduates, she is just a beginner learning how to be a nurse. There is something dramatically wrong with the way we train nurses. Nurses from first year onwards should be taught how to interpret a ECG, how to look at the cardiac monitor and find out why the patient is in low cardiac output. They should be able to interpret all the blood gas report, because a pilot sitting in the cockpit looks at only the indicator coming in front of him. Nurses standing in front of ICU patient, all the data points come. They should know why that is happening and inform the doctor. And that can be done within 1 to 2 months of hands-on training. So we need to tell ourselves that the nursing training program is to train nurses to manage a patient on a ventilator in ICU. And if you train the nurses with that intention, they can be very good community nurses, or they can work in any other hospital. We have to change our attitude.
Well, that's a very good point, and I think that carries the argument forward. So, Dr. Swaminathan, or Soumya, if I may, do you agree that nursing is a coming crisis, the shortage of nurses? And what is a crisis is also an opportunity, because India is also a country that needs to generate jobs. And India should have depth in its educational system, particularly medical education system, to focus on nursing, which hasn't been done adequately. And we have the minister himself sitting there, so then I will turn over to him. So please go ahead.
Yes, I do agree with what Dr. Shetty was saying in terms of in the Western countries, certainly there has been this, what they call the great resignation, where both nurses and doctors are leaving the profession because they've been completely burnt out in the last couple of years. And they will be looking at, despite all the international treaties and talks there are about not, taking resources away from developing world, these countries will attract healthcare providers, from countries like India, or well-trained nurses from other parts of the developing world to themselves. So there is a chance that would happen. But I think it also opens up the broader question of, do we have enough of the other types of healthcare providers other than doctors? I think in the last couple of years, there's been a huge amount of investment in opening new medical colleges and training more doctors. Now, there is no guarantee that these doctors are going to go and serve in those districts. As the minister was saying, that they will always continue to be districts where doctors do not want to go, and nothing will be able to persuade them to go, and we must think about incentives for them. But there are many things that can be done at the primary care level where you don't necessarily need doctors. And the kind of training that Dr. Shetty is describing, perhaps an individual you might call a nurse practitioner. I mean, these kind of ideas have been around in the past about training people who can deliver primary health services, particularly when you have a standardized algorithm to help them. If they come across a pregnant woman, what are the steps they have to do? And using telehealth now, it is very possible for this type of a person, whether they are called a nurse or a nurse practitioner, in the old days they were called an RMP, somebody who had 4 years of basic training, practical hands-on training, and then is mentored, not just left to their own devices, but continues to be mentored by doctors and specialists who may be sitting in the district hospital or in a specialty hospital, but through telehealth will be able to guide them. And this, I think, is something that we need to really invest in, because the other categories of people are lab technicians, physiotherapists, because we're talking about universal health coverage, which goes all the way from health promotion and disease prevention to diagnosis and treatment, but then also to rehabilitation and palliation. And as our population is getting older, life expectancy is increasing, which is a good thing. We have to understand that chronic disease burden is going to increase. And therefore, we also need to think about how we are going to look after people with morbidities. They are going to need spectacles, they're going to need cataract, they're going to need hearing aids, they're going to need mobility devices. And all of this is an opportunity also for our industry to create these kind of affordable devices that people need. And we've just come out with a report. The WHO came out with a global report on assistive technologies, showing that there is a massive, massive gap. I think something like 2 billion people in the world need some assistive device. I think most of us have spectacles. or you need a walking stick at some point of your life, of course, apart from the knees and joints that are replaced, cardiac stents and so on. But just simple things like a walking stick or a hearing aid or a spectacle or an intraocular lens is not available to a lot of people around the world. So here's an investment opportunity to manufacture assistive devices, not only for India, but for the world, which are high quality and affordable, but also inbuilt into the system, these accessibility provisions. And I think the last thing I want to say here is that, we focus a lot on inputs and processes. We need to start measuring outcomes as well. And there, I think our data systems need to be strengthened. We talked about mortality. There's a huge debate about it. There is no doubt that there was a lot of excess mortality, whether or not it was due to COVID. We might have not had the COVID deaths that high-income countries had because of the age structure of our population. But there is no doubt that we had excess mortality because people did not have access to health services. We saw pregnant women dying, we saw people with cancer dying, people with heart attacks, because hospitals were overwhelmed with COVID. And that is what I mean when I talk about the resilience of the health system and being able to take care of problems without overburdening our tertiary care hospitals.
Thank you. So, Minister Sudhakar, there are many points raised there, including now the fact that I think the point that Dr. Swaminathan made earlier, that while we might be living on an average till 72, but say the last 10, 12 years are very tough for most Indians. Because most Indians, if you go to the poorer populations, they don't even have basic things like spectacles, right? My number is 3.53. If I didn't have spectacles, my quality of life would be much poorer. And at some point of time, I think most people in their 60s, late 60s, 70s will need cataract surgery. But a vast majority of Indians will not have access to that. And hearing aids, and dental implants, and things like that. So she just made a follow-up point, and she said that these are also areas for entrepreneurship, because you can also manufacture on a mass scale, given the demand in the market in India, all of this at much cheaper prices, as we can do stents and valves and things like that. So,
Dr. Swati Swaminathan is absolutely right, sir. It is not how long we live, how well we live is the concept that we should understand. And especially in the last 10, 15 years of anybody's life, the quality of life should be improved. That is why our state government, with the help of the national programs, we are designing a program to ensure that anybody who is above 50 years, we are ensuring that every individual in Karnataka is subjected to the eye screening, and if there is any cataract issue, we will ensure that cataractomy is done and provide them IOL if required. Similarly, we have a very unique program for even hearing impaired and even for the children who are born with impairment, hearing impairment. So this is another unique program, and we have allocated a lot of funds for that, and we have started this program, and also the dental implants as well. That is why when I was in my initial remarks, I said participatory kind of healthcare is very important. Like in Singapore, I was observing, they have started something using this deep algorithms, where a pre-diabetic patient, they are going to constantly have a counseling with them. They'll try to find out whether there is an issue with his nourishment, nutrition, what is the kind of lifestyle that he is going ahead with. And they monitor so well, it takes time for him, it lengthens the time for him to develop from pre-diabetic to diabetic. This is what we should always observe. There's so many diseases today, we know that it is because of our lifestyle changes, because of our nutrition, because of the kind of stress management that one goes through. So when there is a participatory kind of a health program, using our lot of education tools, using machine tools and algorithms, definitely one can delay the process of a disease, whatever the disease is. So that is why this government, especially government of Karnataka under the leadership of Mr. Bommaiji, we are laying our lot of emphasis on predictive and preventive kind of a medicine. And that is the future. The second part, what Dr. Swaminathan said and what I also agree is that there is a huge opportunity for the people to invest in healthcare industry, especially the digital industry, healthcare digital mission, where there are national programs, there is a state program. You can see during COVID times how CoWIN portal has helped, how this Arogya Setu has helped us. We ourselves in Karnataka, we had more than 15 apps, right from quarantine app to, monitor the movement of the people. So technology is definitely one thing that is always holding hands of the healthcare. And I feel that innovation, one should embrace, especially the healthcare, much more we need to embrace the technology. We should allow a lot of investments in this area. And more than availability and accessibility, we should also concentrate on the affordability aspect. Because the majority of the population today, of course, they can't afford. I was reading in one of the Times of India's editions saying that due respect to the private sector and their role of healthcare in India, only the affordability, because when you compare between the public health system and the corporate health system, it costs 6 times more than what it costs to treat a patient in a public healthcare system. This is where the government and the private sector should sit and have a dialogue and see how we can make the global healthcare much more affordable in India. Like already we have started for the pharmacy, generic pharmacy. We know that this country is acting like a pharmacy to the world, because lot more than 1,550 companies have involved themselves in producing and manufacturing this generic medicine at a very affordable price. In fact, we I think have 40% of market share worldwide. And since the patents for these medicines, whatever the patented medicines, they are also getting, I think we should identify those patented drugs where their terms are getting over. So such drugs also can be considered for generic medicine. So not just the medicine should be affordable, healthcare also should be affordable. I feel the Ayushman Bharat health assurance scheme, what has been introduced in this country, it is a revolutionary step towards that. Because I can say with authority in government of Karnataka, we have catered to more than 38 lakh patients in the last 4 years, and we have spent more than 5,000 crores. That means so much. We have minimized the out-of-pocket expenditures of those communities, those families. Otherwise, the research says out of that 38 lakh people, at least 30% of people would have lost their living, they would have lost their properties, they would have lost their lands.
Well, I think most of the poor families in India, or on the margins, will go below the poverty line once the family is hit by a serious disease challenge. So having said that, Dr. Shetty, you worked on both sides, and you understand how private healthcare works and the limitations of private healthcare. At the same time, I won't say limitations of public healthcare, but I'd say the the underutilization or under-leveraging of public health care? How do you get the best balance?
First of all, I show you the pattern. When I was a young kid, for any complex problem, people always went to government hospital. In fact, when I was in 7th standard, I needed tonsillectomy, and I had it done in a government hospital in Hubli. And my brother was a doctor working there, and he said that is the best hospital where you can get treated. So this was the case, but over a period of time, many things have happened. But I have just one suggestion to Honorable Minister. In case to improve the efficiency of the public hospital, he has to monitor number of surgeries done in every government hospital. Just ask one question: how many surgeries were done yesterday? How many were under general anesthesia, local anesthesia, and spinal anesthesia? If you get the right number, based on the number, you have total knowledge about how the whole hospital runs. Because to do large number of surgeries, you need to have a very busy OPD. You need to have a diagnostic lab services. You need blood bank, functioning blood bank. We need competent nurses to assist you for the operation. You need competent nurses to manage the patient after surgery. So it is very sad that the policymakers across the world in developing countries never took surgery as a important aspect of public health. In reality, every government concentrates on malaria, TB and HIV. Malaria, TB and HIV every year across the world treats 3 million people. Lack of access to safe surgery every year kills 17 million people. When I talk about surgery, I'm not talking about a heart operation, brain operation. I'm talking about 3 bellwether surgeries. One is a cesarean section for obstructed delivery. Second one is appendicectomy for a burst appendix. Third one is surgery for compound fracture. If these 3 procedures are done in good numbers in all our public hospitals, you have dramatically changed the public health sector completely. So we need to really concentrate on monitoring. When the head of the government hospital comes and meets Honorable Minister, he has to ask him, he will ask him how the hospitals are. He'll say, very good. What is the meaning of good? Where is the data? And you need to ask just one data. How many surgeries you do every day? Everything will change.
Well, that's a very interesting point. It deserves an applause, which it got. Now I know that we've gone ahead of time and everybody is hungry, but we started a bit late, so we can take maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. If you can, the lady in the back there, please do stand up, and some mic will come to you. Will a mic come to her? I can give you a mic.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think the panel focused quite a bit on the physical health aspects. As Dr. Sudhakar was talking about, 38 lakh people have been reached out to. I think the panel must also throw a little light on the mental health aspects as well. So maybe we can address
If you would also introduce yourself, because this is being recorded.
Okay, my name is Madhuri Subbarao, and I'm also a mental health practitioner. Thank you.
So who will take it?
It's a very good question and a topic which is close to my heart as well. During COVID times, Karnataka government took the initiative of counseling almost 25 lakh people who were infected with COVID patient. So we started that because initially the person who was detected, diagnosed with COVID, he hung himself. So that was a initial thing for me to understand. People are going through mental trauma and we need to counsel that this is like any other infection, this has a treatment, and we wanted to give them the reassurance. So with that we started that program, and after that today we have a mental health initiative. Since we have a state-of-art institution, NIMANS in Bangalore, we have made this hub and spoke model. Like the districts, like Kolar, Chikbalapur and Tumkur as a pilot project we have taken. And we are training not just the surgeons or the specialists who are in the tertiary and secondary health facilities. We are training even MBBS doctors who are at the PHCs to know whether somebody is going through a trauma, who is going through a stress, how he should cope up with the stress. And this is how we have started, and we have roped in Robin Uthappa, the cricketer, as the brand ambassador for mental health, because he had suffered himself personally for these mental health issues, especially the depression. So he is doing wonderful work, and that is how the state has taken very seriously the mental health initiative.
Thank you. Soumya,
Namaskara for all of you. My name is D.M. Iqbal. I am a retired.
Please wait for a minute, because some others may also want to engage with this question. Soumya, do you want to engage with the question on mental health? We can't hear Dr. Swaminathan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to add to the excellent points that Dr. Sudhakar just made, and the very innovative tele-mental health program. I have personally seen the program at NIMHANS where they use the ECHO platform to train people at primary health centers around the country on addressing mental health issues. I just wanted to add one point on suicide prevention. Mental health is actually a very big priority for the WHO as well. And we've seen the rates of mental health problems increase. Anxiety and depression have gone up after the pandemic. And this is likely to affect many aspects of our lives. And we have to understand mental health is a construct which is, it's not a medical issue necessarily. It's also around society. And so it's a multi-sectoral approach really to creating that feeling of mental well-being. But on suicide prevention, I just wanted to mention there is a national suicide prevention policy that's been developed by a number of experts. I understand that the ministry is about to release that. It is one of the indicators in the Sustainable Development Goals. And the last report from India showed that the rates of suicide have gone up marginally. They have not gone down. And unfortunately in India, it's women in the age of 15 to 29 who are at the highest risk of suicide. And you can imagine, the reason that may be. A lot of progress can be made just by limiting access to the means. So, for example, by banning hazardous pesticides so that they cannot be bought and stored in people's homes, by responsible media reporting, by social and emotional learning for adolescents, and of course, the early intervention, as the minister was describing, at the PHC level, through call centers. A lot of suicides can be prevented. And so there are inexpensive and cost-effective means. But one of the important ones is restricting access to the means. In the US, they talk about restricting access to firearms because of the high rates of homicide. But in India, just simple intervention and it's been tried in a few districts in Tamil Nadu, where you don't allow people to store pesticides. Even if farmers are using it, it's kept in a community pesticide store, which is under lock and key, and then you go and access it when you need it for your farms. But if it's at home, then this impulse of somebody just wanting to drink it, leads to a lot of preventable suicides. Just wanted to make that additional point.
Dr. Shetty, in your practice, you find that mental health is an aspect which is not paid sufficient attention to? Because in your cardiac practice also, you deal with patients who are dealing with much bigger stresses, physical, financial, anxiety, and everything can get mixed up. So do you find that our medical profession, by and large, is adequately sensitized to the needs of mental health or not?
The mental health was not a top priority for the health practitioners until maybe a decade ago. Even though the mental health specialty existed ever since medicine started, for a doctor, it wasn't a specialty. And it wasn't a glamorous specialty for doctors to embrace mental health. But now things are changing. And this will have a big impact because as affluence sets in, the societal challenges increases, more and more number of people are undergoing stress, including the doctors themselves. The physician burnout is increasing rapidly, especially post-COVID. So these are major issues.
Well, I think we'll take the last we'll have to take the last question because it's 1:15 already. Yes.
Sir, my name is Guru Raj. I'm a CEO of an electronics company. I've been in touch with Dr. Devi Shetty for what he wants as smart devices. But my question is this, sir. For the WhatsApp invite we got for this event, it said that we need to carry masks and so I think many of us are carrying masks but not wearing them in a closed environment. My question to Dr. Soumya Swaminathan is, have we reached a point, doctor, in COVID that we don't need to exercise any precaution?
Wait, the audio is not very clear. None of us is able to figure out. So can you hold the microphone closer to your mouth?
Yeah, so my question to Dr. Swaminathan is, have we reached a point in COVID where we don't need to exercise any more precautions like masks, sanitizers, etc.?
So that's for Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, that have we now reached that stage in the pandemic when we don't need masks and sanitizers?
Yes, I think everybody wishes because we are sick and tired of taking those precautions. But I think we're still in a very dynamic situation. And as WHO has been saying, we have not come to the end of the pandemic, even though the end is in sight. And what is happening is that we're still seeing these variants of SARS-CoV-2, particularly Omicron, circulating. It keeps on evolving and changing. And every time a virus evolves, it tries to make itself more transmissible. And so we're seeing even today, more transmissible variants. Now, the good thing is, of course, in India as well, particularly in India, I would say, is that because of the very high rates of vaccination coverage, particularly amongst the vulnerable groups, elderly and frontline workers, we have a good level of protection from both vaccination and natural infection. Even though I should add here that the booster uptake is still pretty low. I understand it's still at just around 20%. And so ideally one should take 3 doses for effective long-term protection. But in answer to the question, I would say one has to evaluate one's risk and take reasonable precautions. This includes the wearing of masks. When you are in an indoor setting where you have a few hundred people in the auditorium, where you cannot be physically distanced, where the air circulation may not be the best, in that situation, to protect yourselves and others, it's better to keep that mask. Because let's remember that COVID is not the ordinary cold. It does have damage to other organs. And so as far as possible, avoiding a COVID infection, even if you're vaccinated, we don't know what the long-term damage is going to be to the brain, to the heart, and to the respiratory system and to other organ systems. So let's take sensible precautions. And, the added advantage of wearing a mask is you're going to not only prevent COVID, but also influenza and other respiratory infections. As we are entering the season where many of these infections become more common, let's take precautions. Hand washing and mask wearing and staying at home if you're sick and not coughing and spitting in public. These are things that many countries follow, pre-pandemic and will continue to follow. If you walk into Hong Kong or Japan, people wear masks when they feel that they have a cold because they want to protect others. So I think these are just basic good hygiene principles, and I hope we can continue to adopt them and use them sensibly.
Thank you. I'll request each one of the other two distinguished panelists to just answer this in half a minute each. Have we reached that stage yet, and what is your advice? And I think we'd have to wind up, unfortunately. So have we reached the stage where people can now forget about masks and sanitization, so back to normal?
I personally started seeing patients without mask, but good number of my patients do wear mask. I feel that as a doctor, I am 100% exposed to COVID many times and I am resistant, but God only knows, but I prefer not to wear mask.
I totally endorse.
See the sentiment of not wearing a mask gets an applause, which is a bit worrying, I must say. We have to have much greater humility dealing with these viruses, sir.
But I would like to endorse Dr. Swaminathan's view. We should take adequate precaution depending on one's health, and we all know individually how strong we are and what is our physical status. It is better always to have prevention taken.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm afraid we've overshot our time greatly, so we'll have to bring this session to an end. Thank you very much. You've been marvelous, Dr. Swaminathan. We apologize again to keep you waiting. We know that you have many things to do. And you know what's happened as a result of all this confusion, the delay in our start, that is you are being deprived of a half-hour closing speech that I had worked so hard at preparing. So it's your loss, what can I do? So go ahead and have your lunch, and thank you very much for being here. And thank you, Soumya.
Thank you. Would request guests to please stay back. Shekhar mentioned overshot on time, but it was all time put to good use. Yes, this side. Happy to see you on stage. And please, may I request Mr. Murugesh Nirani, the Sachivaru, Large and Medium Industries Minister, to please step up on stage to offer tokens of gratitude to all the guests who have joined us. Dr. Soumya, of course, can only accept it virtually, but it was wonderful to hear all those inputs and insights, to see healthcare not as an expenditure, but as investment. And that cautionary note, particularly on COVID not yet being over. I think that should give us some sense of a reality check as well. But to hear from Dr. Devi Shetty, from Dr. Sudhakar and Mr. Shekhar Gupta is good. May I invite, yes, the mementos are being offered. And I'd like to remind the audience about another session which you should not miss, which is on Resilient Karnataka Success Stories. A little change in the venue. It's now in Auditorium 2. Please make note, Yeregne Hall alide. Resilient Karnataka Success Stories, 2 p.m. And please do not miss the grand closing ceremony at this hall, the Global Investors Meet 2022, when it will come to a wrap. Meanwhile, enjoy more food at the Uta after Food for Thought. And thank you for being such a wonderful audience. It's time for me, Vasanthi Hari Prakash, to sign off from this part. Namaskara, ellarigu.